let's start with the club face. Right?
Absolutely. So if you were to take your setup and swing it back to about waist high, let's first define square is the bottom edge would be at about 90 degrees to the plane or to the arc that the club is swinging in.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yep.
So just kind of rest the stick there. A lot of people are like, geez, that feels shot, but somewhere along the line, someone defined that years ago as square, but I don't know what it's square to.
Right.
Okay, this we can at least say, hey, the leading edge is square to the plane that the club is traveling on.
Love it. So the leading edge is tilted down. It's not toe up, right? It's tilted down.
Correct. It's tilted down slightly, which we'll get to in a later video, but if you basically maintain those wrist angles and start to turn, it's now going to be more square at impact.
Yeah, you don't have to do anything from there.
Or you have to do less. You have to do less, which is important.
Yeah. So 90 degrees to the plane line here, and that also applies in the follow through?
Correct.
I'll work that down to sort of impact.
Impact, so now you can see where the ball would be traveling, and now as that swings up an arc, it's going to continue up that arc and stay square to about knee high or just above, somewhere between knee and waist high.
Good, love that.
Okay, if you wanted to draw the ball, I'd say, okay, Eric, now let's close. So if we look at it from the plane standpoint, that's square. So if I said, okay, we want to learn how to draw it, let's close it a little bit. So which now gets into some little micro wrist positions to hit a specific shot.
Got it. So we want to make sure that the face is square enough, right? Kind of on the way back, tilted down some amount.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And so that as I deliver it down, it's still tilted down some amount.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can do less to get a stable,
Correct.
pattern. And then I want to keep that stable into my follow through. But we know that there's some micro wrist action we got to talk about, right?
We will talk about, and it's barring what type of shot do you want to hit.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, perfect. So club face square to the arc, right? Club face makes life easier on the way through. Let's talk about sort of a little bit of the minutia of how the wrist angles work during the release phase. You know, we've talked about kind of the three motions of the wrist angles during the downswing.
Yep.
Right?
Cocking, uncocking, flexion or extension.
Yep.
And then some amount of supination.
Right.
And again, barring your grip.
Grip dependent. Right?
Always.
Grip dependent. Going to be some amount of ulnar.
Yep. That's uncocking.
Uncocking.
Yep.
Some amount of the flexion.
Yep.
Depending.
So if you were going to hit my hand, that's going to
way.
stabilize your wrist so you don't injure yourself hitting me.
Yeah. As compared to the.
Yeah. As opposed to that, which will go down the road to the hospital.
That's right. So we got the flexion part, we have the ulnar part, and then some amount of supination again, depending upon grip.
Correct.
Okay. And so the key then is how do we mix and match those three things in space with a club face that's somewhat square to have the shaft forward, right? Have appropriate dynamic loft and have a stable release pattern. And so if we were to just kind of explain in simple terms, let's say I just kind of preset the club during the downswing maybe.
Yeah, and I might change one tiny little detail here and just put a little more bend in that arm because this is going to be an important lever.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yep.
And now if I said, okay, let's open the face just a little bit.
Yep.
Good, so you can feel what your wrist is doing. Let's close the face a little bit. And notice how I'm isolating the wrist. So I'm not letting your arms do anything. A lot of people, you say close the club face and they go like this.
Yeah.
And no, you can close the club face literally with a little micro move of the wrist. You got it.
Gotcha.
You got it. So we got a little more bend in here. And now if we turn a little bit toward the target, that gets us to impact, really stable.
Yeah.
Okay. So even here, it's like, okay, let's hit a cut. Well, we might feel that open up a little bit, or let's hit a draw. Let's close it. Let's think of the path that we now want to swing it.
Yep.
So we can swing it a little more out, okay, which changes your plane,
Got it.
which will also change the curve of the ball.
Got it.
Okay. And then our next checkpoint, let's assume this one is perfectly on plane. There we go. Club face is at 90 degrees to the plane it's swinging on.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And beyond that point, I really don't care what happens because the ball's gone.
Yeah, you can just kind of let it go.
Yeah.
From that. So the goal is going to be if we can get this, kind of, right, you said before, right? If I can get this club face slightly tilted down in the delivery phase, get my arm in here, I then probably don't have to do as much consciously, potentially.
You really don't.
Right.
And what a lot of people, the feedback that I tend to get is, geez, if I do that with a driver, I pop it up or I hit these low ones. Well, that's probably because you're doing something extra near the ball that you really don't need to.
Yes.
And then we have another video that we'll talk about the axis tilt for a chip shot versus a driver, which is going to really put in stone, geez, why these wrist angles are so important to stabilize the club and the club face with different clubs. So we're hitting a 9-iron here. We don't need a whole lot of tilt to the right to try and get a ball up in the air.
Keep it pretty simple.
Yeah, because there's enough loft already on the club.
And ideally, right, we would have an impact snap. We'd use something where
of course.
I wouldn't have to think about as much micro. I could feel the ball on my form.
Exactly.
Right, and keep it simple.
Yeah.
And so of those 3 components, right, how can someone tell if, let's say, obviously if I come in and I don't have the shaft in and I'm here, I might have to feel like I add kind of one or multiple of those 3.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
I might have to feel like I add a little bit more of the flexion portion.
Correct.
Right? I might have to feel like I add, if let's say I come in and my face is open.
Yeah.
Depending on my grip, right?
Absolutely. And how about we just, because most of our students have weaker grips to begin with, so it's like, okay, there's a weaker grip. Well, that's going to lead to a wide open club face. And I'm going to say, okay, Eric, now you got to really feel that, but I want you to feel that with a little more bend here, and we'll show you why that's a big power source also.
So the weaker the grip, I got to really flex and supinate.
Oh, sure. And if you look at John Rahm hit a ball, his wrist is, or Bryson DeChambeau or Jordan Spieth, their grip is so weak that it requires more flexion or more bowing to stabilize the club and square the club face.
And it's doable that way. They can do it. I mean, maybe
they're
a little harder.
Major winners.
Yeah, right. So you can do it.
Yeah.
If you get super weak, it maybe requires a lot of effort.
Correct.
Right. But so we would like something more neutral. We would like this to be square, right, to the arc.
Yes, square to the plane or the arc.
And then it's a combination of those wrist movements and then keeping that square in the follow through. But we know also that there's some body motion to have to go in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how the body works from that impact phase into the follow through.
We need your knees, femurs, pelvis, spine to jive or coordinate with what your arms are doing. So what I like taking people through, if you go ahead and just put your hands together like that, and I say, okay, Eric, don't move your knees and don't move your pelvis and swing your hands forward to me. Yeah, you can't get much past that point, okay? So there's our impact, right? Yep. So now if I say, okay, stand up, and now turn your pelvis toward the target. So in order for your pelvis to turn toward the target, one of 2 things had to turn. Either your spine itself had to turn, or your knees and femurs turned your pelvis for you. So if we...
Give me that one more time, Marty.
Yep. So we take people, we get them into impact, and I say, okay, don't move your knees or pelvis, swing your arms forward. So your range of motion is done right there. So if you're not turning, this is going to break and collapse and twist, and your radius is going to shorten.
Keep a stable
you cannot. Okay, you can keep it to about 4 or 5 inches past the ball, but that's it. You're toast. So now I say, okay, stand up, turn your pelvis and your knees and your legs, boom. So what happened was your spine just went from flexed forward, think in terms of shooting a basketball, to extended. Think about serving a tennis ball. If I stay down here, well, my arm can only go this high. It cannot physically go any higher than that without me doing damage. But as soon as I extend the spine, well, now my arm has a whole new range of motion.
Got it.
So in golf, if my spine stays bent over, I'm limited to stopping right here.
You're done.
Unless I get my knees, pelvis to turn. And if my head stays, doesn't have to stay perfect, just kind of watch your shadow. If my head kind of stays there, your spine will start to go into extension.
And what was the part you said there which is good? My spine can't turn unless my...
Well, it can turn on its own, which might be a whole nother video, okay? But in a downswing, when we're looking, we can turn for either stability, which if we're just kind of working on pitch shots, well, I can take my knees and my femurs and they help to turn my pelvis so then I can push off.
Got it.
Okay? And the harder I want to go, the more I'm going to get into the ground to turn and whatnot. So with pitching and chipping, we're turning to allow that range of motion to stay constant to about waist high.
Perfect. So if we want this stable release pattern, right back to the beginning part, I want to have a face that's square to the arc on the way back. And then also on the way through, at least until about into here.
Correct.
For me to be able to do that, I need wrist conditions that are appropriate.
Yes.
Right? Which are going to include some combination of the flexion, some combination of the ulnar, and some combination of supination depending upon the grip.
Correct.
Ideally, I'd have an impact snap to make that simple and train that in. And then if I want to continue that release pattern and keep that stable in the follow through.
So now the pelvis and the spine have to coordinate so that we can now max out your radius.
And that would mean for me here, I'm kind of feeling like my butt's tucked under me,
Yeah.
belt buckle up, right?
Absolutely.
Chest up. And if I can put those three pieces together and work on those three, the likelihood of a stable release pattern, solid contact
Goes up.
dramatically.
Big time.
So 3 things to focus on. Of course, there's other micro things, but we want to control the pieces that we can control. We want club face, we want wrist angles, we want the body motions. If we're able to train those in, do them slow,
Yep.
right? And lengthen the swing, go slow in the beginning, add speed as you go, grab an impact snap. We'll put a link in the description down below to train that in. That gives you the highest likelihood of a stable release pattern. And then once you get that, add length and speed, right?
Yes.
Kind of test it and then continue going.
No doubt. And I tell people all the time, it's like, look, let's do it at 40 miles an hour and then 50 miles an hour, then 60 miles an hour, then 70 miles an hour. And I equate it to, think of the first car you ever owned.
Yep.
I know mine,
Okay.
at about 70 miles an hour, the whole thing was rattling. So I knew don't swing 70 miles, or don't drive 70 miles an hour.
Yep.
So I had to keep it around 60 for the car to feel stable. Well, that's what we're looking for in our golf swing. We want it to be stable, at least to here.